The Sun will engulf Earth approximately 7.59 billion years from now. This is that morning. The number deserves a moment, 7.59 billion years after the first organism metabolized sunlight into energy on this surface. 7.59 billion years after the first cell divided in the first warm shallow pool. 7.59 billion years after the first animal opened the first eye on a world that was already ancient. The process that produced everything that has ever happened on this planet, every birth, every extinction, every chemical reaction in every cell that ever lived, has been running for the entire duration of that number, powered by the same object now rising over the horizon. Today, the object rising over the horizon is not the same object that powered those processes. Today, the sun is something else. The horizon has been glowing for 6 hours. This is the first way that the last sunrise is different from every sunrise that preceded it. A normal sunrise, the kind that occurred approximately 2.7 trillion times during Earth's history before this morning, begins as a thin line of light at the edge of the sky, grows into a brightening arc, and resolves into a disk that clears the horizon in approximately 2 minutes. The disk in a normal sunrise subtends about half a degree of angular diameter across the sky. The object now approaching the horizon does not subtend half a degree. The sun has reached its maximum size as a red giant, its surface now extending beyond Earth's original orbit by 20%, shining approximately 3,000 times brighter than the sun of the distant past. The disk rising over the eastern horizon this morning subtends an angle so large that the word disk no longer applies. What is rising is a wall. The atmosphere is the first thing that tells you this. Normal sunrises produce color in the sky because sunlight scatters off air molecules. Blue light scatters most, so the daytime sky is blue. And at sunrise, when light travels through more atmosphere at an angle, the shorter wavelengths scatter away first and the longer red and orange wavelengths survive to reach your eye. This morning, the sky to the east is not lit with a normal scattered color. The atmosphere is lit from within. Every air molecule from the surface to the top of the stratosphere is being bombarded with radiation from a source so large and so close that the concept of atmospheric scattering at an angle has no meaning. The light is coming from everywhere on the eastern half of the sky simultaneously, because the source of the light occupies the entire eastern half of the sky. Red giant stars have surface temperatures of approximately 4,000 to 5,800 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly half as hot as the sun's current surface, and because their energy is spread across such an enormous area, they shine in the redder part of the spectrum, producing an orange-reddish hue. The light arriving on this surface is not the white-yellow light of the sun you would have known when Earth had oceans and forests and everything that lived in them. The light is deep amber. It is the color of something burning at a lower temperature across a surface 200 times wider than the sun that lit 4 billion years of life on this planet. The sky that this light is producing overhead is not blue. Blue light still scatters, but the incoming light no longer contains enough blue wavelengths at sufficient intensity to make the sky look blue. The sky at zenith is a deep, saturated orange. Toward the horizon, where the atmosphere is thickest, it shifts to a color somewhere between copper and rust. There is no one to see this. Earth's surface was stripped of complex multicellular life approximately 1 billion years before this morning. The mechanism was not dramatic in the way that extinction events in the deep past were dramatic. The sun has been increasing in brightness by approximately 1% every 100 million years throughout its main sequence life, and this gradual brightening eventually provided enough additional energy to begin evaporating the oceans. When the oceans began to go, the water vapor entered the atmosphere in concentrations high enough to trap additional heat, which accelerated the evaporation, which trapped more heat. The last ocean on Earth dried approximately 900 million years before this morning, and by the time the final oceans disappeared, the only organisms still alive on the surface were single-celled anaerobes in hydrothermal systems deep in the rock. They survived without sunlight, metabolizing chemical energy from the planet's interior for another 300 million years, before the surface temperature rose past the point where even they could maintain the enzymatic processes that constituted their existence. The last living organism on Earth did not witness a sunrise. The last living organism on Earth would not have recognized what is rising this morning as a sunrise at all. The ground you are standing on, the rock that constitutes the surface of a planet that has existed for 4.5 billion years, is currently registering a surface temperature of approximately 1,300 degrees Celsius. The crust is not yet molten. It is above the melting point of most sedimentary rock and approaching the melting point of basalt. The surface in some regions is liquid. In others, where the rock composition has a higher melting point, it is solid but radiating heat in the infrared spectrum in amounts that would be visible to any instrument calibrated for thermal radiation. The planet's interior has been adding heat to this process as well. The tidal interaction between Earth and the expanding Sun's outer atmosphere has been transferring angular momentum out of Earth's orbit for hundreds of thousands of years, causing the orbit to decay slowly inward. Once inside the Sun's atmosphere, Earth has been colliding with particles of gas, its orbit decaying, spiraling inward. The tidal flexing this produces in the planet's interior generates additional heat through friction. The interior is hotter than it was when the planet had a moon. The moon broke apart approximately 4 billion years before this morning, when tidal forces from the expanding Sun crossed the threshold of the Roche limit, the distance at which tidal forces overcome the gravity holding a body together. And the moon disintegrated into a ring of debris that has long since spiraled into Earth's upper atmosphere and rained down as a thin layer of pulverized silicate across the already uninhabitable surface. The rim of the Sun clears the horizon now. The rim does not look like the rim of the Sun you know. The edge of a normal solar disk is sharp and defined, a clean boundary between the photosphere and the sky. The edge of the red giant Sun is diffuse. The outer layers of a red giant are so distended and low in density that the transition from stellar atmosphere to interplanetary space is gradual. What clears the horizon this morning is not a sharp arc. It is a smeared luminous boundary that bleeds into the sky for degrees above and below the geometric edge of the disk, a corona and chromospheres so extended that they constitute a visible structure in their own right. The reddish plasma of the outer solar atmosphere is already present in the sky above the disk, interacting with what remains of Earth's upper atmosphere, generating aurorae that would span the entire visible sky if there were eyes to see them. Not the green and white curtains of normal auroral activity, but deep crimson sheets of excited hydrogen plasma, reacting with the magnetic field of a planet whose core is now being deformed by tidal forces. The disk rises. Rises is the wrong word. The disk does not rise the way the sun rises in the memory of every living thing that ever watched a morning. The disk is so enormous that its apparent motion across the sky, the product of Earth's rotation, is slower relative to its angular size. It takes hours for the base of the disk to clear the horizon because the base of the disk is so far above the horizon that clearing it is measured in degrees of arc, not fractions of a degree. The sun has grown so large in diameter that it fills the entire sky from the surface of a planet close enough to witness it. The radiation arriving at the surface is not registering as visible light alone. The luminosity of a red giant sun is approximately 2,000 to 3,000 times the luminosity of the main sequence sun that warmed the first oceans. The electromagnetic radiation across all wavelengths, infrared, visible, ultraviolet, and X-ray from the energetic outer atmosphere, is arriving at the surface at an intensity that has no analogy in the entire prior history of this planet. The surface rock is absorbing it. The top layer of basalt on the exposed surface is beginning to remelt in the direct path of the radiation, not through conduction from below, but through direct radiative heating from above, the way a lens focuses light to a point and the material at the focus liquefies. The atmosphere above is thinning. It has been thinning for millions of years under the increasing radiation load, with the lighter molecules, hydrogen and helium, reaching escape velocity and leaving the planet, and the heavier molecules losing their upper atmospheric layers to a process called photoionization, radiation. Energetic enough to strip electrons from atoms, turning them into ions that interact differently with the planet's magnetic field and gradually bleed away into space. What remains of the atmosphere is dense with carbon dioxide and nitrogen and the chemical products of a surface that has been cooking for millions of years. There is no free oxygen. There is no water vapor. There is no molecule in the atmosphere that was placed there by any biological process, because there has been no biological process for nearly 1 billion years. The disk is fully above the horizon. The shadow behind you, the shadow cast on the surface of a dead planet by a sun that is now filling 50 degrees of angular sky, is deep and absolute. The sun is so large and so close and so bright that the terminator between light and shadow on the surface is not a gradual transition. The boundary between the irradiated surface and the shadow is sharp because the source of the radiation, despite its enormous disk size, is still a disk with a geometric edge, and the geometry of shadow still applies. On the shadow side of you, the surface is dark and slightly cooler. Still 1200 degrees, but not receiving the direct radiative load of the disk above. On the lit side, the surface is luminous in its own right, radiating back into the sky the energy it is absorbing, glowing in the infrared. Earth is currently inside the sun's outer chromosphere. The boundary between the interplanetary medium and the solar atmosphere crossed Earth's orbital radius several thousand years before this morning. The gas pressure at this location is extraordinarily low by any terrestrial standard, far lower than the vacuum in any laboratory ever produced on Earth. But it is not zero, and it is being deposited on every surface exposed to it. The solar wind at this distance is a continuous stream of charged particles arriving at velocities of hundreds of kilometers per second. There is no magnetic field strong enough remaining to deflect them. They are hitting the surface directly and heating it from below the process of direct radiative heating from above. Earth will spiral inward after engulfment, eventually being destroyed close to the core after approximately 3,000 years, dispersing into hot gas at temperatures of thousands to millions of degrees. This morning is the last morning because tomorrow the geometry will be different. Tomorrow, what rises over the eastern horizon will not be a disk or a wall. Tomorrow, the eastern horizon will be inside the sun. The distinction between sunrise and simply being inside a star will cease to be meaningful. The surface of the planet will cease to be the surface of a planet. The sun rises. The light that reaches the liquefying rock where you stand has traveled from a surface 3,000 times more luminous than the light that first fell on the first cell in the first warm ocean 4 billion years ago. Every wavelength of that original light was used. Every photon that hit a chlorophyll molecule and drove a chemical reaction that built a sugar, that built a cell, that built every living thing that ever existed on this surface came from the same star that is now filling the sky above the last scorched remnant of all of it. The star is not aware of this. The physics did not change to accommodate it. The morning light falls on the rock and the rock absorbs it, and the temperature goes up and the orbit decays by another measurable increment, and the sun continues to expand on the schedule that stellar physics has been running on since the hydrogen in the core began to run out 5 billion years ago. The last sunrise on Earth is not an ending. An ending implies that something is stopping. The sun is not stopping.